Welcome to today's episode of the Speak to the Rod podcast with Chuck and Christy. Welcome to today's episode of the Speak to the Rod podcast with Chuck and Christy. We're happy to be back and talking about a really, really good subject, really good topic. And we're going to talk today about trusting God. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good.
I think one of the reasons, and in the last few episodes, we've been talking about, knowing God personally. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do. We can talk about purpose. We can talk about identity. We can talk about a lot of those things. But I think we talk about these a lot of times, Christy. A lot of times we don't trust God because we don't know Him very well.
Yeah. The knowing God, like we said in that last episodes, has to be the foundation, and everything else comes from that.
Yes, and when we talk about trust, we live in a society right now, in a culture that, we don't trust people.
Yeah.
It's hard to trust somebody because there's so much betrayal. There's so much, talking behind your back.
Yeah.
There's so much people that, and as humans, it's hard to trust somebody when they fail. And I think we have that problem. And when we come to Jesus, when we come to Christ, sometimes we are carrying that, insecurity or those issues. And when we talk about trusting God, trust God, we have a hard time trusting Him.
Yeah, because, I think you'd mentioned before, the way we learn and the way we know things is from, different experience you've had. So if you've had a betrayal in your life, then it's hard to trust somebody again. And if you have a portrayal of love and that person turns you away, or that person fails you, like you said, or that person hurts you, then you start building up these walls. And unfortunately, those walls go all the way into sometimes our relationship with God.
I think a few years ago, I was talking to someone. What is the difference between forgiveness and trust? And we're going to talk about trust today. Obviously, trust in God. But, trust, the concept of trust is a really interesting one because, when somebody betrays you or somebody, offends you, you want to call it like that. Sometimes, it takes time to forgive.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is a process.
It most certainly is.
It is a process when you start. That's another topic. I don't want to get too deep into that, but today, maybe in another episode. But when you forgive somebody, that doesn't mean, or it's hard to trust that person again. And I think me and you, we talked to some people in the past and talking about this topic. When you forgive somebody, sometimes you gotta rebuild the trust.
Yeah. You forgive. It's an act of forgiveness. Like you said, we're not going to go into this. And the forgiveness, it's an act that you do. It's a decision you make. But the trust has to be rebuilt, and that takes much more time.
I remember with the illustration that we use is like, when you trust someone, it's like you're building these relationships. And, when you build a relationship out of trust, it's like you're building a house, you're building a wall. Let's put it like that. You're building, and when that trust is broken, then all that is falling apart.
Yeah.
And you had to rebuild. And sometimes we were talking about, how easy it is to demolish.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't take much time to demolish something. When you go, I remember, you remember that before we got married. Yeah, I got invited, or we got, asked to come, and we were helping this church in El Paso. And before they were starting, building the stuff for the church, they wanted to demolish everything that was inside of it. And it was fun.
Yeah, I bet.
It was fun. We have some hammers. We have some, sledgehammers. We have all kinds of tools to demolish. And it didn't take a long time to demolish something.
No, I bet it was a lot of fun.
I'm
hoping you had, safety goggles, and probably didn't.
I'm not going to talk about that on the air, but what I'm talking about, it is harder to rebuild.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes more time, more effort, even. And it's the same way in a relationship with somebody. That betrayal is like a big wrecking ball that comes in and demolishes and tears down a relationship that you've had with somebody. And yeah, you forgive, and you're like, okay, but after that, there has to be a rebuilding. And that's the rebuild of trust.
Exactly, trust.
One block at a time, one.
One day at a time
One day at a
sometimes. And sometimes we really as humans, and it doesn't matter if you are a believer or not, as humans, it's really hard to trust somebody again.
Yeah.
Because especially because we've seen this happen in our own lives and so many people, the hardest ones are the ones that are made by people that you love
Yeah.
and people that you trust.
And it's okay. Not every person is trustworthy. I mean, obviously we have to, and we're not going to go into that. Like I said, but you do set boundaries, and in many relationships, there is a forgiveness, but you really don't want to rebuild but that's where it gets touchy and iffy, because God is worthy
Okay.
of trust.
Now, I'm going to read from Proverbs chapter 3. It says in verse 5, trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do. Everywhere you go, He's the one who will keep you on the track.
Yeah.
And there's one more thing. It says, don't assume that you know it all.
That's good.
Because, I mean, we talk about we are the generation of know-it-all. We know it all.
Yeah, there's so much information out there. We learned so fast, but sometimes the information is faulty.
Yeah. So trust God from the bottom of your heart. Trust Him. When we get to know God, and this is one of the things that it's in our hearts today to share. When you get closer to Him, and the more you know Him, the more you get to understand that He's worthy of our trust. The difference between relationship with other people, it can be marriage, it can be, a relationship with your father, with your mother, with your sister, with your siblings, with your kids, a relationship with a close friend, the BFF, if you want to call it like that. We are humans and we all fail. And that's the complicated thing about those kind of relationships, because, we fail.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to let each other down.
And it happens.
Eventually.
And, I don't want to put a lot of the stuff out on the air, but even us, we have times in our marriage. We've been married for 21 years, and there's been times, not a lot. I gotta be honest, not a lot, but that I let you down, and maybe you feel like you need to make a decision to trust me again, and it can be small things. It can be, I didn't back you up in a decision. Stuff like that. And it happens in every kind of relationship. But the difference here, when we're talking about God, is that He does not fail.
Yeah, He does not fail. He will not let you down.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was asking him, what do you think God has in store for you? What do you think about God's plan for your life? And he was very honest. He was a young guy, and he said, well, whatever He wants, whatever He sends my way, I'm going to take it. Now, I understand that, because, we want to submit to the will of God and, whatever comes. But what does the Bible say about that? What does Jeremiah say about the plans of God for our lives? He says that His plans for us are plans of good. Plans of good. Now, that is His heart, and that is His desire for each one of us, that we can walk with Him, that we can get to trust Him in every decision in our lives. Yeah. But sometimes, I think in our Western culture, we have a problem with that.
Yeah.
We trust in a lot of things except Him.
Yeah.
Do you remember many, many years ago, somebody asked me, why is Christianity so different in places where it's rough? Like they were mentioning Africa, they were mentioning the Middle East, or places like that. What is Christianity so? Why do they see so many miracles over there? Why do they say? Why do they see so many? You see these crusades with 1 million people. You see these everything you do is like massive. You don't see that as much as in Europe or even in America, especially in the U.S. Why do you think is that? And I remember we talk about, because they don't have any other choice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's either trust or, I mean,
I mean,
trust.
you believe in God and you know God, and this is the point what we're trying to get today. You get to know God, you get to know His personality, and when you get to know God, and this is, I just want to make a little emphasis on this. You want to know God, you got to spend time with Him.
Yeah.
There's no other way.
Yeah. That's the bottom line.
When we met each other, I mean, we're not gonna talk about that kind of relationship, but when we met each other, you thought you knew me, right?
Yeah. I mean,
I was giving my good side,
yeah.
but then you get married, and then now it's a commitment, and that's the difference between a lot of people. And I want to be clear in this because a lot of people, they will claim or they will say, "I know God," but they don't have a commitment with Him. And it's going to be very hard that you get to know Him very well in order to trust Him if you don't make a commitment with Him. We live in a culture that doesn't believe in commitment.
That's true.
We believe that, I mean, I know this is not the topic, but we talk about marriage, for example. People nowadays, they don't want to marry. They don't want that commitment because in case
Yeah.
the other person fails. And that is a problem. Because you are expecting and coming into a relationship expecting or maybe fearful that something is going to go the wrong way, then you will never commit.
100%.
Exactly. And that's the same with God. Sometimes we come to God and we're kind of like, well,
Reserved.
reserved. We don't know if He's going to do what He says, but
You want a safety net. You want something to be able to fall back on in case He doesn't.
well, let's talk about Abraham for a minute. Abraham, we call him the father of faith, and he believed God, right? I mean, we talk about him before, and we talk about his kind of faith when he was believing God that He was gonna give him a son, and believing God that He was gonna fulfill His promises, even though everything looked impossible,
Right.
seemed impossible. He trusted God, right?
Yeah,
But
regardless.
there's a couple things that sometimes we forget about him, and a couple facts. One of them is that at one point in his life, he was probably getting desperate, probably doubting, and probably thinking, I had to find another way. And what happens? His wife Sarah,
Yeah. Has a good idea.
great idea. By the way, we all come with great idea. That's what I love about this proverb. It says, "Don't try to figure out everything on your own." What happens when we try to everything on our own?
Yeah, we have really good ideas, but I mean, they don't, like you mentioned before, our thoughts are not even comparable to His thoughts.
Now, what happens in this story is that Sarah comes with the idea of, let's. I will say it like this: let's help God. Sometimes we're gonna help Him, and I think it's because we don't completely understand Him, we don't trust Him, and we are humans. I'm not putting the blame in anybody.
Yeah, we've helped God plenty of times.
plenty of times. And the problem with that is, like in this story, is when they tried to help God, they had this great idea that in the moment seemed like a great idea. Sarah says, "Why don't you take my concubine, your concubine, and you have a son with her?" And because he was more, it was something that it was more. It was
probable.
the probability of him having a son with his servant was higher, and yeah, he did. He was very obedient.
Yeah.
He didn't twist. I mean, they didn't twist his arm. He said, "Okay." He seemed to be a good idea. And what happens?
Well, he had a son. I mean, he did
Ishmael.
have a son. Yes.
And I don't wanna go in deep into that, but since that moment on time, it has affected history for the next thousands of years until today.
Yeah.
We have this big thing going on between the sons of Isaac, which is Israel, and the sons of Ishmael, which is, the cousins, the distant cousins in the Middle East, that they're fighting each other because everything is because they have a great idea. Great ideas sometimes are not God's ideas.
Exactly.
That's why I think it's important for us to get to know Him. What is God? And I've been reading, and we've been reading together the Bible, and we try every day to read the same kind of chapters in the Bible so we can come in and talk about it. But you know, you remember this a few days ago. We were reading about David, how David had a fear of God on him,
Yeah.
that he didn't want to mess up, and he was consulting God.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, he didn't want to go into battle with the Philistines before he was asking God.
Yeah. Yeah. He continually wanted to make sure, okay, God, is this the right thing for me to do?
And why do you think he was doing that? I believe that because he really wanted to make sure that he was following his plan.
Yeah.
Now, that brings us into another problem, his will. And I know this is something that some people are having some arguments. And what is God's will? What is God's will? And everybody's trying to fulfill God's will. Well, the only way we can fulfill his will and get to know his will is when we get to know him. I mean, his word. A lot of people have a hard time understanding this. And that's why it's so easy so many times to have great ideas.
Yeah.
You know, great ideas. You know, if you are somebody that has a lot of initiative, you know, you are very proactive, you are a person that has a lot of great ideas.
Yeah. Planner.
A planner. And in our culture right now, we like to plan ahead of time, sometimes 2-3 years in advance. But how many times have we make so many bad decisions, Christy, because we didn't ask God in the first place?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we don't ask him because we don't trust him.
Or maybe we do know. Maybe he does tell us, and we're like, well, yeah, that sounds good, but just in case. I think that's a big, thing that, well, personally, I'll do, because I'll hear from God. I'm like, yes, I believe this. I believe you. We're in the right direction. But it's so easy to say, okay, but just in case, I'll have a backup plan or a plan B. I mean,
we talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
I remember when God called us into the mission field. We've been in the mission field for 10 years now.
Yeah.
And, when in that time, we live in central Mexico, and our ministry was in central Mexico. We were doing pretty well, I believe. I mean,
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. And, we have a lot of connections back then. What we could do. We were doing a lot of things down there. And, but I remember, it started with you, and around the same time, God started putting a burden in a call to come as missionaries to the U.S. And, in that time, it was hard because our 3 kids were already born.
Yeah.
So it was a big step of faith. And we had so many doubts.
Yeah.
So many doubts. And we wanted to make sure that we were following God's will.
Yeah, we wanted to consult God. And it was a big step, because we're talking about leaving our country, our culture, our friends and family. And so we wanted, to make sure it was the best decision, not only for you and me, but now for our 3 children.
Exactly. It was not going to be easy for them, and it wasn't. It wasn't at the beginning. But I remember, and that's one of the things, we were getting closer to God, and we wanted to ask him, and, and there's so many voices, and this is the hardest part of this. And I understand if you have any doubts, you're trying to make a decision, and sometimes you have so many voices saying yes, saying no, and that's the hardest part of this. But that's when you gotta remember that is his voice, and his voice is clear. The Bible says, Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice."
Yeah.
Now, what is God's voice look like? You mentioned that, with our children, they know your voice
Yeah.
very well.
Yeah.
I know your voice. I know you're angry, which doesn't happen very often.
My angry tone and my happy tone.
I know your happy tone, but I didn't know that at the beginning.
The mom voice on the phone when you're all angry at the kids and someone calls, and then all of a sudden your voice changes into hello.
Yes, I saw a meme on Facebook the other day, and it was pretty funny because you see these little dinosaur. I think it was the one from Toy Story, and he was so nice. And it says something. These are your parents during worship. They're singing, so happy. And then the meme was in the other side was I think it was the Jurassic Park T-Rex,
yeah.
all mad, and that's when you are making something mad,
Yeah.
making your parents mad.
Clean your room or something.
So we have different tones, but this is the point. The point is when you spend time with each, we spend enough time with each other, and our kids have spent time with us long enough that they know our voice. So when you get to know God, and you get closer to Him, you're gonna recognize His voice.
You can
And-
distinguish it between other voices. I mean, there might be noise going on in here, and if I start to speak, my children they'll recognize my voice versus all the other noise around.
Exactly. And you know, it's hard. So for us, it was hard because we wanted to make sure. And then something happened. And I wanna tell this story because
Okay,
I
yeah,
think
story time.
it's story time. I think it's gonna be really
Yes.
really good. It's gonna help you a lot. So when we got to a point, so I remember we were making this big decision, and we made I remember we were in a meeting, and then you know we were, doing, praying. God gave us and that is what we said. Do you remember? God, we want a tangible confirmation that you are actually calling us
To move,
to
leave
move,
our country.
to leave our country, to leave our comfort zone, like Abraham, leave your land. And we did that. We prayed like that. And I remember we were coming in that moment. We were coming to visit the place where we were planning on moving, and we started getting in our car with our children. We got to the border, and it got really bad at the border. We at that time, I only have a tourist visa, and we were just coming to visit and come back. That was the plan. But when I got there, I remember the agent that was in the border, which by the way we appreciate what they're doing. If you work in
Border
any kind of in law enforcement, we appreciate, we understand why you're doing it. But in that time, it was terrible, terrible. You had to be outside because you
Yeah,
had,
I'm a citizen. My kids are citizens. So
Yeah.
we were waiting. He was just getting his permit inside. Usually takes, I don't know,
30 minutes.
tops 30 minutes if there's a line.
Yeah.
But it was 1 hour went by, 2 hours went by. I had no idea what's going on. He had to have his cell phone turned off. So I'm just sitting there waiting.
I think you stay there for 5, 6 hours. But the story is this: by the time everything, we were not going anywhere inside that office, and I called one of the supervisors, and the supervisor came to me, and he asked me 3 questions, which is odd because when I travel internationally, they ask you all kinds of questions, but this is not the questions that I was expecting. The first question he asked me, he said, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, "Yes." He said, second question, he said, "Are you a preacher?" I said, "Yeah, I am a preacher, a minister." Okay. And the third question was the hardest question because he said, "Do you know how to hear from God?" Now, that was a question that I was never expected to be asked in an immigration office. Maybe at a
Right.
church, maybe at a, I don't know. But he asked me that, and I was not as confident as the other 2 answers. And I said, "I believe so." And this is what he said. And this is crazy. But he said, "God is calling you to come, not to come and look, but to move here as permanently." And we had to go back to Central Mexico.
Yeah, you had to turn in your tourist visa, and he said because you're not going to come as a tourist anymore. You need to go back home and
Go to the embassy.
Go to the embassy and get your residence, and that's more permanent. See,
Yeah.
we had something to fall back on. If it doesn't work, then we can always come back to Mexico. There's
Exactly.
no problem. It's just a tourist visa, so we're just here for a little while and we go back.
Now that is the problem when you don't trust God fully, because you always have something to lean back. You
Fall back
get
on.
sick. The first thing that comes to your mind for most of us is let's go to the doctor. It's not about asking God for healing. We get into a financial situation. The first thing we say, well, let's go get a loan or what. We always have our plans. Yeah. But before we finish the episode, we'll continue with this topic a little further, maybe next time. But this is what it says. I'm going to read it again in Proverbs chapter 3. It says, "Trust God from the bottom of your heart with everything. Don't try to figure out everything on your own." Because if we try to figure it out, folks, we're not going to be very successful.
Yeah.
So we invited you today, and we challenge you today. Trust Him. If you don't trust Him, maybe you need to get a little closer to Him. Because the closer you get to God, the closer you to get to His heart, you got to trust Him more.
Yeah.
Because He is trustworthy.
He is trustworthy.
So see you next time.